Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fialka. Today is November 24, 2021. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. Thank you, Rob.
My pleasure. You guys have fun.
Go
Hopefully, you're
ahead
right
and
about
say
something.
it's an honor and a pleasure to be here with Walt Heenan. Is that the correct way to pronounce your last name?
You got it right. You got it right. A lot of people don't.
Walt, it's really honor and a pleasure. We've shared time in a Finnegan's Wake reading club, and you're calling from where?
I am calling from New Paltz, New York.
New Paltz, that's a great town. So,
Yeah.
the first question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
Best thing for a human being. Best thing for a human being is to thrive. And then I guess what does it take to thrive? Human connection, a sense of purpose. Yeah, I think.
That's good. I get that connection, purpose a lot, but I don't get the word thrive very often. That was really nice. What's another word for thrive?
Another word for thrive. Another word for thrive. It's almost more like easier for me to describe it. I think
Oh,
of
go ahead, describe it.
thriving. Yeah, I think of thriving more as anything that helps your. I guess I don't mean it in the literal sense, but your spiritual journey,
Right.
and or your. Yeah, it's mostly about your spiritual journey. Who what makes you feel better as a person and more whole, and makes you. Yeah, I guess that's about it.
That's good. Thank you. What's what's your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
So I'm almost embarrassed to admit it, but probably it's become my favorite form of information has probably become the internet and
Yeah.
the World Wide Web. And I spend, in some ways, I would almost say far too much time out there, but it's just such a wealth of uh, information and interactivity and community, and the providing the ability to connect with so many different people that I never would have had the opportunity to connect with. So I would have to say that that would be my preferred or currently favorite form of information.
But let me just interject. Did you grow up a reader?
I did, but not. I more grew into being a reader, but I was a good reader. Like I was one of those kids in like grade school who like really did well in like the reading assessments, and but I read probably more than your average person, but I didn't consider myself a reader. So to
Did
speak.
you grow but did you grow up reading because your parents were doing it as an example? They told you to, or did you pick it up on your own?
No, they took well. So my parents were very forceful about telling me or making it clear to me that school was very important and learning was very important. But it's not something that I got by example from them, because I guess they were readers in the sense that maybe they'd read the newspaper
Yeah.
occasionally or something like that. But um, television was big in our house, and I would say especially my parents watched a lot of television, probably didn't do that much reading. So I'd say I picked it up more on my own, especially more as I got older.
Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Well, I mean, I think fundamentally the combination of information and then our ability to utilize it or synthesize it or develop technologies. And by technologies, I don't just mean physical things, but inventions are what have allowed us to I'll use the word progress as a species and have provided us with many of the things that I really appreciate as, as modern life giving me versus having to say live back in the Stone Age or something like that. And I think it's all information is fundamentally, the foundation that it's built on. And then I think that, or the building blocks. And then from that, we have our knowledge, our intellect, our logic, that we utilize those information building blocks to create everything that we have. Although I think there's interestingly enough, long before I ever had kids, I was living in Virginia at the time, and I was listening to NPR, and I don't remember the guy's name, but he was the head of I believe it's called the St. George's School District, which is the largest school district in the country. And it encompassed like an incredibly large area with, I think, tens of thousands, 100,000 students, some huge number of high school students and grade school students. And he was being interviewed, and he said, the one thing that we have to do more of is we have to get more information into our kids. It's all about information. We got to get information. We got to get the kids to absorb more information. And I just remembered thinking to myself, I never want my kids to go to school in that school district. That's the thing, because it's not about information. Information is what we build with, but it's the knowledge and our intellect that actually is important.
It's how you process the information. That was good.
Yeah.
Good observation, Walt. But do you think this need or want, and a lot of these questions at the beginning, or some of these questions at the beginning, are either or, and it doesn't mean I'm giving you two choices. Well, really what I'm after is more your hunch or your guess or your intuition. But do you think this need or want to collect information, gather information, is more innate or more invented?
I think it's innate. I think it's something that it's almost like an evolutionary imperative, because as a species, the better we get at not only collecting information but then synthesizing and utilizing that information, the more evolutionary advantage it gives us. And so I think if you look not just in humans, I think if you look at, all living things, the more, that provides an advantage, just like strength or speed or.
Yeah. Do thoughts create emotions?
Sure. And vice versa. I mean, I think you can, I know in my life, I've been able to intentionally modify my emotions just by intentionally thinking certain things. So I know that if I'm unintentionally thinking things, it's almost certainly going to be affecting me emotionally. So I think, yeah, absolutely. And are you just looking for a yes or no answer here, by the way?
No.
Okay.
You're doing great, man. Now, this is fun. I'm looking for anything. It's mainly just, again, your intuition. You could say pass or I don't know. You don't have to feel you have to answer it, but it's fine. Yeah. Is thinking more innate or more invented?
So I guess to me, that's a less of a black and white answer. I mean, I would say it's more innate, but I would have to qualify that with, what do you mean by thinking? So thinking could literally just be the thought processes that occur. We couldn't exist without thinking at some level. But then if you're talking about higher level thought processes, I think some of that is, again, evolutionarily created, but then there's also things that are invented. So mathematics, for example, is a way of thinking about the world, but it's invented.
Yeah. I don't know what I think until I fill in the blank.
I don't know what I think until I have more information.
Good answer. Can humans think without language?
So by my definition of think, no. No.
Yeah. Good. So Chomsky said language is not just words. It's culture, it's tradition, it's a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. Walt, what do you do when language does not work, when it breaks down?
I get frustrated. But uh, yeah, unfortunately, I'm not sure what you do when language breaks down, because language is such a critical way for us to interact as intellectual beings. And so the one way is the caveman way is to resort to violence. But short of that, when it breaks down, I'm assuming there's some type of a conflict, and so consequently, yeah, I don't know what you do. I think it's a tragedy when it breaks down. You have to keep working to make the language work.
I like your honesty. Thank you. Your observations of humans, I know it's both and it depends. Are humans more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
Feeling beings.
Yeah.
I mean, like you said, it's both, and I think it
Yeah.
depends on the person.
Yeah.
But I think as a species, we're more emotionally reactive.
These are two questions from 1950 by Alan Turing. Is thinking a function of the soul?
No. But then I have to confess I'm an atheist. So
Can machines think?
not yet in my mind, but I do believe they will at some point in the not too distant future.
Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
Good question. I'd like to say meaning, but if I was honest, I'd probably say I pursue happiness more than meaning, although I try to pursue both. But if I had to say which did I pursue more, I would say happiness.
Really good. Again, I appreciate your honesty, Walton, and I also appreciate the fact that you don't feel rushed. You can think. You can stop and just think. I don't want you to feel pressured like you have to answer right off the bat. Yeah.
Yeah, because these are kind of questions I can't answer them all right off.
Does the brain more detect consciousness or create consciousness? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're detecting it, or are we actually creating it?
Oh, man. So that is such a tough question, because and to be honest with you, it's something I've struggled with, not in that form, but just what the hell is consciousness? So, I mean, I think so. If I understand the question, I actually think it's almost both, because I do believe consciousness is really just a physical process. So at some level it's there, but it's created by the brain because of the electrochemical, reactions in the brain.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. A woman the other day said, the word more doesn't function in your question there. I loved it because, I love when people answer a question with a question or challenge a question. So Audre Lorde, the poet, said, you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rainer responded to her and says, "You can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?"
Well, what new tool do I suggest? To be honest with you, I'm not sure. I'm just not deep enough to get that question.
Yeah, some of my questions I introduce with a quote, and it's just like a cute quote. It doesn't mean you have to answer it in regards to the quote. And in fact,
Right.
all the questions are you put them into the context you want.
Gotcha.
So it's been interesting because people tend to think, well, to dismantle the master's house, to challenge authority, whatever you want to, however you want to interpret that, or to challenge the man, what controls us, or as Frank Zappa asked so brilliant, who are the brain police? Is that the master, or is that something inside your own head? He just asked a question. He didn't tell you who they are. He just said the question, who are the brain police? So it's interesting.
I was going to say, so I think I'm not sure there is a new tool because, much like many of the themes that we've explored in our Finnegan's Wake group, all the tools I think have always been here, just in different technological forms. And so, so I don't necessarily like the question of how do you dismantle the master's house necessarily, because I'm not sure that's always the right thing. Sometimes, how do you build the house? How do you dismantle the house? And so,
like you're a house builder. you're like I used to stand on the Venice boardwalk with a sign that said "Electricity killed humanity," and everybody. This was pre-internet. And everybody would come up to me and go, "I agree. When I go camping, it's so good to be away from electricity." And then one guy came up to me and said, "Dude, I'm an electrician. I don't kill humanity." What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
I guess I don't worry a lot when I go to bed, but if when I have worried going to bed, it's usually pretty mundane stuff about my life. I mean, the things that I worry about when I'm awake are broader, issues, climate change, and how. Actually, if I had to think of the single thing I worry about the most, it's what it seems like is our inability to really grasp at a deep level the problems that we have as a species.
Yeah, it's good. So McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound, the poet, that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions so that we can learn how to cope with them. So studying the wake together, even with this book coming out in 39, Joyce is like an antenna, and he's sort of broadcasting and detecting these hidden psychic effects of whether it's email or printed word or spoken word or religion. So McLuhan's one of his main probes was, well, we can look to the artist to expose the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, then we can cope with what we don't like about them. But he says, why do we ignore them? Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects, even though the artists are broadcasting them to
us? So the question presupposes that you accept the premise that the artists are broadcasting.
That is good. I also have people go, "Oh, I don't agree with that." Yeah, that is really good. Psychoanalyze the question, Walt. That's what we're here about. This is good. Thank you.
So, I mean, if you accept that as the premise, why don't we listen to them? I think maybe because we don't understand their language.
Yeah.
And, I think if you're an artist, maybe you understand it, or maybe you understand certain artists, but not others.
Very good. Do artists have a moral obligation?
Boy, I have a hard time putting that on anybody. A moral obligation over and above what anybody else has? No. Moral obligation to be a good person, a moral obligation, to not do bad things, sure, but not any more than you or I or anybody else. So no, I don't have any moral obligations.
Yeah,
They're creating something, and if we like it, we take it in and we appreciate it. It's actually a gift.
Yeah.
So if we don't like it, go on.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I appreciate your answer, because John Waters, the movie director, said when he was a kid and he watched Wizard of Oz, he said he cheered for the Wicked Witch of the West. And it was like, we're all cheering for the good witch. And is that bad that he cheered for the bad witch? So that moral obligation to artists, I appreciate your answer there. Are you more afraid of old ideas or more afraid of new ideas?
I'm honestly not afraid of, I can't think of any ideas. I mean, and I think I actually am not afraid. I really love new ideas. I mean, I think we would wither and die as a species without new ideas. So I'm more afraid of, maybe if the question was a little different, of like, am I more afraid of losing the old ideas or not having the new ideas? I'd say more afraid of not having the new ideas, because they're so important.
That's good. I love it when people say, I want to rephrase your question. I'm open to this. So can you conjure up your earliest memory ever, or one of them?
Yeah, I mean, I have a very early memory that's fairly kind of boring, other than I remember looking in a mirror when I was 3 or 4 years old with my younger brother and just trying to figure out how to get to the other side, to the other me that was on the other side of the class.
Dude, if you think that's boring, man, that's highly advanced. Most people, it's always
so maybe I was 4. I don't know.
Yeah, but that's pretty heavy. That is like, so do you think memory is more a curse or more a blessing?
Oh, well, for me, I more of a blessing, definitely. I mean, I love memory. It's it's what the future is built on, but I mean, I think memory could become a curse if you found yourself somehow living in your memories, or not just having them and appreciating them. So I think it for different people, it's more of a curse or a blessing. For me, I think it's a blessing. I have good memories throughout my life, and the bad memories are what I build a better future on.
Really good. Tell me, within your immediate family and then outside your immediate family, just briefly, one role model or someone who had an impact on you, and what specifically was that impact?
I mean, so within my immediate family, I mean, I had a complicated relationship with my father, but he was a very outsized human being, and had a very big impact on who I am today, probably more than anybody else in the world.
But what'd you mainly get from him, Walt? What would you say the main sort of thing you got?
I think the main thing that I got for him was the value of intellectual honesty, and the value of challenging ideas, and maybe not just embracing the most popular, being willing to fight for things that you thought were important.
Wow. What was his career?
So he was like early on, just kind of tried a little bit of sales a few different ways, and then he worked in social work with young kids, and then eventually he quit that and started a little woodcraft business, doing craft shows, and that's kind of what he did for the latter portion of his life.
Very good. So outside your immediate family, someone had an impact, and what was that impact?
Someone who had an impact outside. Probably the person who's had the biggest impact on me is actually my best friend, who we've been friends since high school. And again, another hugely outsized personality. And I think it's the type of thing where we've had an impact on each other. But again, it's the type of thing where he's impacted me in terms of how I think about things, always challenging anything that I say and forcing me to dive deep into the underlying ideas about what I might be thinking or believing or feeling.
Dude, that's what we're all about. We're trying to get to this meta level. And so I appreciate that. Walt, did your parents raise you a particular religion?
Yes, Catholic, Roman Catholic.
Did you check out at any time?
Oh yeah.
What age about?
So it was a long process. I mean, I kind of like I went to a Catholic grade school, and then after 8th grade, I said, I'm not going to Catholic high school. I don't care. And so I went to a public high school. And by the time I was 18, I kind of had given up on the Catholic Church, but not the Christian religion. And but I kind of never, I really was never, I think I gave up on most what you would call formal religions by the time I was probably mid to late 20s, and always considered myself spiritual, I guess. But, you know, I guess I've become much more of a materialist as I've aged. And so now I'm pretty much a non-believer at this point.
Do you pray?
No.
If God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
What would I like God to say to me? So you would have to be a different God than any of the former religious gods that are around. But what would I like him to say to me? I'd like him to say, well, you were wrong about, you know, there not being an afterlife, and you were a good person. That's what I'd like him to say. I'd like him to say that I lived a good life.
Really well put. Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
So my own personal opinion on that is that I do think that evil people exist, but not in the, you know, formal sense of like there's this objective sense of good and evil. I mean, I think that morality is something that we've evolved or evolves with us as a species, and to the extent that you completely violate the norms and values of that species, then you're evil. I tend to think that that's not like it's a very emotional question, because who doesn't have a visceral response to some of the things we would look at out there? This guy who recently drove his vehicle through a parade. I mean, how is that not at some level evil? But I don't believe in any, I guess, objective sense of good and evil, so I'm not gonna. But on the other hand, I react very viscerally to that. So yes, I do think that there is, but not maybe in the more normal sense of the word.
Yeah, I like how you break down words. I mean, that's probably what unites us over studying the wake. So we're going to get to the wake, but one more question in this regard is, Walt, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? This one I'm going to set up with a few modern thinkers' thoughts. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurais. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you react to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Well, I mean, I think that I think Alan Watts had a very interesting way of looking at the world, and to a great extent, it depends on, I think, again, how, you know, what you mean by acknowledge. So if what you mean by acknowledge is, you know, acknowledge to yourself what they've done to you, then I think, then I disagree with him. If what we mean by acknowledge is to somehow allow it to affect us in a negative way, then we are empowering them because we're giving them power over ourselves. I think that, and to a great extent, I think we do that with people. We often allow someone control over us by just allowing it, as opposed to walking away, ignoring it, extracting yourself from that relationship or that situation. And so, so I guess probably on the fundamental level, I agree with Alan Watts. Took me a little while to get around to it, but I think I agree with him.
No, it's very interesting because people sometimes say, if you don't acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. So it is, you broke down the words. That's what's important. So on to James Joyce. He first projectionist and business manager at the first cinema in Dublin called Volta Cinema. Basically checked out. He said, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Years later, Faulkner said, sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Oh, so for me, that's, I mean, I feel like I do live life, but the life that I live is limited by pragmatic constraints. It's limited by geography. It's limited by, you know, a lot of different things that I can experience on some, I believe, much more limited level by experiencing it in a fictional world. You know, literally living, I guess, vicariously, or understanding other, you know, another idea or another way of seeing the world, or maybe a set of relationships that I haven't experienced, but seeing it through someone else's eyes. I think there's a lot of value to that. But of course, so I was just about to say, of course, you know, it's important to also go out and live the world, or live in the real world, but I don't know if that's true. So I think actually fundamentally what's important is what brings you joy and what brings you, you know, I guess fulfillment. Is it possible to live a life purely intellectually? I think, you know, maybe. And if so, is that life any more diminished or worth less than someone who's out seeing a tree or breathing the air or, you know, doing things in the physical world? So I think that, and I can say I have a son who's 20 years old, and he really loves video gaming. And I can see some of the, there's a lot of negative press out there about gaming and all that kind of stuff. But it's been an interesting evolution for me watching him grow up and seeing myself, certainly in the beginning, having a totally negative opinion of, that's a waste of time, that kind of thing. But also seeing, essentially this world grow up around people interacting, because these people who play the video games, it's not like they're just sitting there playing their game by themselves. There's sometimes 3, 5, 10 people all playing the same game at the same time and talking using Discord on their computers. And so that's in some ways akin to reading fiction as opposed to going out and living in the real world. But it's a real experience, and there's real emotion and real growth that occurs, and real human interaction and human connection. So it's hard for me to really, I guess, diss somebody who wants to live in an intellectual space as opposed to a physical space.
Yeah. No, it was well done. My friend, his kid was playing video games, and he's a peace activist, and it's all war, war, war. And he's like, I hate my son's playing violent video games. And then you go into the kitchen, and my friend's fixing food, and on NPR, it's going war, war, war. And it's like, what's the difference, dude? If it's coming from a video game or a radio.
Right.
And it's sort of like you realize it's how you process and deal with the new invention. And then go to the New York Times, they have reviews of movies, reviews of books, and now they have reviews of video games. So it's like it raised the status of this is not just some cheap little trend that kids picked up. It's a huge industry, and it does have services, and it does have disservices. So
well, it's interesting also because we live in a world now where, like, I mean, as much as the world is changing, with gender roles and all that kind of stuff, most men, and I think even young boys today, have grown up in a culture that's been formed over centuries. And it used to be important for a young boy to essentially be able to, become a hero, to show his heroism, to be able to, like defeat an enemy, or to go on a vision quest, and now we don't have that anymore, unless you happen to be, the quarterback of the football team, or, the point guard on the basketball team, or whatever. But if you're not into that, kind of like heroic role, then to a certain extent, this, video gaming gives you the ability to become, I guess, create that hero's role for yourself in some way.
Hero's journey, man. That's why Joseph Campbell was so attracted to Joyce. So let's just walk through for a second, Walt. What I understand is basically your 3 kind of pursuits. You go to college to study psychology and sociology, then you become computer scientist, then you build houses. Like, what first attracted you to study psychology and sociology, and then first attract you to shift to computer, and then what shifted you to building?
So I wish it was more intentional than it was. But, like, for example, particularly my bachelor's degree was, got out of high school. What do you do next? I actually took a year off and went and got a job in a factory, and then worked for the highway department, and said, boy, I need to do something different. So it's like, what do you do? So go to college. I had no clue what to do. Just started taking some classes. Liked my sociology classes. Thought, what do you do? Become a social worker, or maybe psychology would help. So interestingly enough, I got out and couldn't find a job. So and then I'd always wanted to travel. So I quit my whatever I was doing, which was working in a little department store, and just bought a van, drove around the country for a while. Ended up in California where I met someone, and I went to visit her brother, and he had an Apple computer, of all things. This is probably back in 1978, 79, something like that. And I sat down on it and started playing with it. I was like, this is awesome. So I ended up eventually back in New York and thought, well, I'll go back to school for computers because I liked them. They were fun. And so that set me on my computer journey, but which was awesome. And I mean, developing software is an incredibly challenging, or can be incredibly challenging and thoughtful and creative activity that I really liked as a developer. But if you're good as a developer, I think it says they're called the Peter principle. They just keep, raising you up, and then they made me the team leader, and then the head of the group, and eventually ended up, as a vice president. And the higher up I got, the more I hated it. So eventually, just decided to quit it. And I had a friend who was building houses, and it looked like a good way to live a life. And so I've been doing that the last 19 years.
But that's interesting. What would you call that? Risk, bravery, courage. How did you make that decision to switch over? Because it seems as though you had a success, but then there's something that says, I want to change. What was the sort of impetus? What caused you to change over?
Well, so for me, I've always been a little bit, I guess, you asked, I think, one of your questions earlier was, do I consider myself like I'd rather be happy, or
do you more pursue meaning or more pursue happiness?
Meaning or happiness? Yeah. So whenever I found myself in jobs, I don't like working for people. And whenever I found myself in jobs where I had to go to work and had a boss, and I've always tried to find ways out. So, part of it was when I was actually working in software and it started to get a little boring. I took some time off and went back and got my master's degree. And then when I went back to software again, I think, I just always looked for ways out. At a certain point, I had developed some really great software, but then I was bored. And so I quit my job, and I was going to go down and spend some time in Guatemala. But the company basically said, no, we don't want to lose you. We'll hire you as a consultant. And so they paid me to be a consultant. And I ended up never going to Guatemala to this day, and to a certain disappointment. And then, so when it came time that I was realizing I was unhappy in the software industry, period, I just decided I had to figure out a way out. And I had a friend, like I said, friend building houses. It looked like a great life, a great lifestyle, a great way to live. And you actually create things you can see. That was one of the things I hated about software, is I built all these amazing pieces of software, and I'm sure they don't even exist anymore. Maybe they're on in a storage room on a floppy disk or something like that, or a hard drive somewhere, but they're not used anymore. And it's just very ephemeral. And, this idea of actually constructing and building physical things that will stay there long after I'm dead was kind of appealing to me.
So that's a good lead in. A screenwriting teacher told me great art or great film or great house is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Stanley Kubrick says the opposite. Great film or great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process in being a builder?
What role does intention play? So intention plays a big role, because pretty much almost everything I do is intentional. So everything from the every decision we make about what we're going to build and how we're going to design it, and the products that we're going to use, the technologies we use. It's all very intentional, and I guess I would lean towards, in my particular case, I do want my intention to be seen, but I can see how in art or screenwriting so interesting enough, I guess no, maybe I would want maybe like as a filmmaker, I would want my art to be seen, or as an author, I would want my art to be seen, not necessarily, or my intention to be seen, not necessarily overtly, but certainly, if you're going to create something, I believe that most humans, if you're going to create something, you have a purpose to it. If you don't have a purpose, why bother doing it? And if you have a purpose, you're going to want that purpose to affect people in some way. And so to the extent you expect to be able to control that effect, that's intention. I do struggle sometimes, for example, with some like Joyce, and particularly with Finnegan's Wake, is like how much of it is our authorial intent, and how much of it is, suppose we were all wrong about everything. Suppose even Ulysses, suppose that our interpretations of it were all wrong, but we still gained what we gained out of it. Is there anything wrong with that? No, I don't think so. I think it's still a great work of art, even if we all missed the point or missed the author's point. And so, anyway, go ahead.
Well, that was good, because you probably subconsciously or unconsciously just plugged Rob's podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. You didn't do that consciously, I can tell. But we're going to go into that in a second. But I want to ask you one more follow-up question. Is Marcel Duchamp, who was there in Paris same time Joyce was, said there's no art without an audience. When you're building the house, you said how much is, let's say, the owner or the person, they're your boss in essence, right? They're hiring you to, no, you build the house and then sell it. There you go. Okay. So you made that.
So I've owned. So
how much are you thinking? Yeah. How much are you thinking of your potential buyer when you're building your house?
Oh,
when you're building a house.
I'm always thinking what's going to appeal to them. So I'm not just creating some creation and saying, this is what I want to build. And if somebody wants to buy it, great. And if they don't, well, that's fine too. I'm always thinking, we have a certain, people who come to our area. And so I actually build mostly second homes. So, I know the kind of profile of the people that I build for. And so I'm always thinking, what do they want in a house? And how can I make it more attractive to somebody who wants to build it? But I don't like having customers until the house is built.
That's good. Very well done.
Too much work.
Yeah. So let's go back to the wake. Before we go into the wake, what did you grow up reading that had an impact on you pre-Joyce? And then when did you read Joyce? At college because they told you to, or you picked it up on your own? And what Joyce did you start with?
So what did I read before Joyce? So I've always,
That had an impact on you.
yeah, sure. I mean, the book that I loved, I think the most, as far as a like just being like, wow, this was an amazing piece of work, was a book called Sometimes a Great Notion by
Yeah.
Ken Kesey.
Yeah.
And it just was so, like, it blew me away when I read it, because at the time I actually had sort of this bit of a little fantasy that made no sense whatsoever because I'm a terrible writer. But I thought, oh yeah, I want to write the next great American novel. And I read Sometimes a Great Notion. I was just like, just the the characters he created, but also the voices, and it was just amazing. And so yeah, so that was, but I mean, so it's funny. I would joke around with my friends. I have such a bad memory, and I do. So if I try to think of, I've read a ton of books, but if I try to think of specific ones,
But let me just jump
remember.
in there. Let me jump in there for a second, Walt, because just saying the phrase "great American novel," because I know in our interactions in the Wake group, I'll drop McLuhan's name all the time, and you actually went and researched it a little. You looked into it. In Marshall, right when that term was being bubbling in culture because of Norman Mailer, or was it Salinger, or anybody, Faulkner, Fitzgerald, who's writing the great American novel, Hemingway or Moby Dick or whatever,
Right.
capturing its time. I mean, Ken Kesey really did that well with both Cuckoo's Nest and Sometimes Great Notion. And Marshall said at that point, he says, you can't write the great American novel because the front page of the newspaper is the great American novel. So it was like, wow, I didn't learn that until recently, but back then it didn't dawn on me. That's sort of true. And then what did Joyce do? Is he just sat in Paris in the 20s and listened to shortwave radio and wrote it all down. And it was like, this is the great American novel. This is the great universal novel, GUN instead of GAN. And it was like, it just reflected, like Martha Graham said, great artists aren't ahead of their times. They are their times. Ken Kesey was our time when Sometimes a Great Notion came out. He captured it. And you can see that you having that aspiration from reading that was the important thing of his book. You didn't even have to go do it. You just got inspired, you know. So, I mean, I'm just curious if there were other like big classical, like I'm glad you started with Ken Kesey because that seems better, in my opinion, to lead to Joyce. But it's like these big Russian guys, or Moby Dick, or any of those guys.
So I've never been able to read the Russian
Yeah.
guys. I just can't. I tried, but I can't do it. I've pretty much read a ton of Hemingway, Moby Dick. I slogged through,
Yeah.
but didn't enjoy it. I mean, for that matter, well, you said you wanted to get into Joyce a little bit, maybe in sequence, but like I didn't enjoy. Like I love Finnegan's Wake. I wake up in the morning looking forward to reading Finnegan's Wake.
You mean not even in our group? Just
yeah. Before the group, I used to wake up every morning and just read it on my own. I didn't have a group. I just did it on my own, and I loved it. I couldn't wait to wake up every morning, and I would set my clock sometimes to wake up early so I'd have time by myself, quiet time to read it. And
out loud to yourself, or not out loud?
No, I read it out loud to myself.
In a room to yourself. Now, but what did you start Joyce wise? And where was it? Was it in college or on your own? It
was on my own. So it was on my own. And the full disclosure, my part of my motivation originally was I'm 100% Irish. And I thought, and so we have a strong Irish heritage in my family on my mother's side. And I was always enamored with the Irishness. And then I remember at some point in my life hearing, oh, James Joyce, the greatest novelist of the 20th century, and thinking, well, I should read Joyce. And so I started with Dubliners, Portrait of the Artist. And funny story, I thought next I'll read Ulysses, but then I thought I actually had bought a copy of Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake and had them sitting on my bookshelf, and hadn't picked up either of them, didn't know anything about them, and thought, well, I should read Ulysses, but I've heard it's really, really hard. So this Finnegan's Wake sounds like it's probably going to be easier. So I picked up Finnegan's Wake thinking it was going to be easy. Sounded like a kid's book. And I started to read it, and I got through like a half page, and what the hell is this? Flipped a few more pages, more of it, through the whole book. I'm like, oh, this is nuts. I'll never read this. So I did read Ulysses then.
Right. But was this sociology college, computer science, or house building time?
Computer science time.
Computer science time. So then did you read somewhere that you have to read Finnegan's Wake out loud? How did you get to the Wake?
Oh, Finnegan's Wake was so I read Ulysses in a fairly concentrated, linear fashion over the course of 9 months, a year, whatever it took. I don't even remember, and didn't particularly enjoy it. I didn't really like it, and thought, I've actually since subsequently came to appreciate it much more, having reread little portions of it here and then, although I've never sat down and reread the whole thing. But I thought, well, I should read Finnegan's Wake now. I've pretty much read everything else. And so I probably 4 or 5 times sat down and tried different strategies. Maybe I heard about different ways of doing it. And I know I heard somewhere along the way that it helps to read it out loud. And so I'd kind of decided I would never read it because I just thought it's too much work, and I'm not just going to do it to force myself through it, until I found there was a of the new Naxos recording that came out recently of Finnegan's Wake, the unabridged recording. So there was an earlier Naxos recording that I had on CD, and it was an abridged recording, and it was beautiful, phenomenal. And I started listening to it to fall asleep at night, and I listened to it for several years. Didn't remember a word of it, but just loved the sound. And after a while thought, well, maybe I'll read Finnegan's Wake, and all I want to do is make it sound like as pretty as it sounds in this recording. And that's how I got back into it.
How many years ago did you get that CD?
The CD I probably got 10 years ago.
And then when did you find Finnegan's Wake reading clubs? Because of COVID?
Yeah, well, actually, I started reading Finnegan's Wake really for the first time. I told you I had those 4 or 5 or 6 aborted attempts, but not this past June, but so basically a year and a half ago is when I first picked up Finnegan's Wake. And I think I read it for about 8 months or so, 8 or 9 months. And I found that Finnegan's Wake reading group that we're in.
How did you find Sweeney's Finnegan's Wake reading group?
I don't remember. I remember
just wandering online or something.
Yeah, I think so. And I heard that they had a group, and I emailed them and said, could I join? And they were super welcoming and friendly. And I said, look, I'm a real beginner. I don't know. And at that point, I think they were about page 50 of our current reading, and I was about page 70 after 8 months of reading.
Wow.
And
so you've been reading Finnegan's Wake with a group for about 2 years, let's say.
No, I've been reading Finnegan's Wake with a group for less than a year.
Oh, less than a year.
Yeah.
You've never done it in person, only online.
Yeah, only online.
Yeah. because there's 52 Finnegan's Wake reading clubs across the world, and now I wonder how many of them are online. But I think we're lucky because the Sweeney's group is amazing. But you can consider our Venice one is fun too, but we only do it once a month. And Peter Quadrino's Austin, Texas group was really good, but sort of on hiatus. And then Bill Kennedy has one. And so the question about the wake I have for you off the top of your head is, how much of the wake do you think you get? Just percentage, like 0, 50, 80. And how much of the wake did Joyce get?
How much do I get? Boy, I think even the idea of getting the wake is such a, I mean, I think that, so for example, because I think there are so many levels of the wake, so I'm going to answer it this way. I think in terms of following the narrative, if to the extent there is sort of this overriding narrative, because there's this sort of Hiberno-English thing that goes through it with a whole bunch of other like themes and stuff interwoven in there, and this web and network of things. But as far as just following the Hiberno-English story, if you will, I'd probably get 30% of it, maybe,
right.
If I'm lucky.
Right.
And the other stuff, I get nothing yet. I'm working on it.
Really? But Hiberno-English aside, no story. You don't think you get it higher percentage?
Of what's happening? I mean,
no, not what's happening. The effect of the wake, reading it out loud.
So when you say the effect, you were at our last meeting, so you heard the whole discussion with Bill Kennedy and stuff, which is, I mean, I think, the wake can be experienced on so many different levels. I think on the level that I experience it at, or want to experience it at, I probably get 80% of it.
Right.
Which is the way that I want to experience it is I just want to hear the music. I want to hear the words. I want to kind of hear these, like what I imagine, like these gnome-like Irish guys somewhere on the west of Ireland talking in a language I can barely understand. And, and that's what I get.
Gnome-like. I like that. Because you know what a puka is? You know what a puka is?
I don't.
A puka is a leprechaun. One of our Finnegan's Wake members is from Ireland, and he told me once he's a land builder. Like, no, I don't know. He builds where the roads are in Dublin, and one day they go, okay, you got to build this road here, but you got to go around that. And he goes, why? He says, because pukas live there. And it's like, these are guys with ties and shirt. They're like insane human beings. Are like, what? He couldn't challenge him. He just said, okay.
This is in modern, like today, Ireland?
Well, I mean, it was 30, 40 years ago, but it's still pukas are, it would be like, someone's building a road in Alaska, and they go, hey, you got to build it around there because that's where Santa Claus lives.
Right.
And you just go, oh, okay, just go along with it, But how much, just now, don't separate. How much did Joyce get the wake? If either Hiberno English or just the experiential,
So I think he got it pretty good, honestly. I think he kind of
80, 90, or 100%. Where would you just give me a number just off the top of your head? Just your
So I think he was created. You just want me to give you a number, okay?
I mean, you can explain it, but I want to compare it to yours.
Yeah, I think he got it on many levels, but he got it like 80%.
80, that is great. Walt says 80, and then he says Joyce 80. That is so perfect, because I think that so no, you can suss it out now. Go ahead.
Well, I just think that it's on so many different levels, and he gets it on all those levels 80%, and he was creating something that he didn't want to finish it. He didn't want to create the whole thing. He didn't want to, like, it wasn't supposed to be this cast in concrete, like, dead thing. It was this living creation that would, I actually think that a lot of what he did there in the wake, in my opinion, is dependent upon, he was almost playing with us, his reader, and trying to make us like expose ourselves to ourselves. And he couldn't predict how that would go, but he did things, I think, that caused us to do that. And consequently, I think that to say he got it 100%, he couldn't have got it 100% because he was creating something that couldn't be completed. So
no, that was really well put, because there's a cliche that goes, the journey is more important than the destination. Why do we have to name a destination or seek a destination if the journey is more important?
this is a question for me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's similar in the Joyce, and it's similar in how much of Joyce's intention, was there in creating.
Right.
So
I mean, what strikes me about the question is something which I've kind of not struggled with, but sort of resisted my entire life, which is this idea of always having to label everything. So, you talk about naming the destination when the journey's more important. Yeah, it's, I mean, maybe it gives you something to shoot for, an idea or, a goal. But at the end of the day, it feels more like this need that we have to categorize and label and fit everything into, paradigm. And, sometimes that's besides the point, and maybe even counterproductive. So I think, don't think we need to label it.
Joyce nailed it. What you just said. He said absent-minded. In the wake, he calls it ABCD minded.
Right.
So he's saying you're absent-minded when you use printed word, and it's language about language. But this is, I'm going to just take off on some of my questions, and we can still refer to the wake if you want. It's not
sure. No.
But it's interesting because great film icon of mine, George Manupelli, his mantra was ignore yourself. And Jonas Mekas, another film icon, said, there is no self-expression. The great jazz pianist Cecil Taylor said, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. Is art making, novel writing, house building, is it more self-expression, or is it more you're a vehicle for whatever culture or technology is dominant? I know it's both and it depends, but just your hunch.
Well, I mean, it exists within, certainly, all of those things exist within a cultural and technological framework. So, but I do think that and they couldn't be created without it. But so accepting that, I do think it's self-expression. I think it's
more self-expression.
It's creation. I almost think, other than the fact that, other than the fact that stuff exists and certain expressions or creations couldn't exist without them, it's all self-expression. It's all things that are created from what came before.
Can art making, novel writing be egoless?
My opinion, nothing can be egoless. So no.
Was Freud right?
No, so my gut throw out there was Freud, right? Freud said so many things, and I think at the end of the day, Freud was just, I think he came up with some interesting observations about the unconscious, but at the end of the day, he was probably right about some things and wrong about many things. So no.
Nice. Way to go, Walt. What's more important, conviction or compromise?
If I had to choose between them, I would say compromise is more important. I mean, I think convictions, depends on, it really does depend on the circumstances and what you have convictions about. And, there are certain things that are just not worth compromising or shouldn't be compromised on. But fundamentally, we are a social species that needs to get along, and it's much more important for us to understand that we need to negotiate and compromise and give and take, and then for us to set down the conviction that I'm right and I'll just make everybody see it my way. So I think compromise.
Nice. There's no right or wrong answers to any of these questions, Walt, but that one you got right. No, but I'm curious. Where did you get that from? Did you get it from the way your parents raised you or on your own?
It's been so long since my parents have been around, but so it's I think I got that one more through living life.
Yeah.
And, experiencing and, seeing how things work.
What was the motive of the cave artist? Just your hunch.
So I have to confess, I don't know much about cave art, but if I had to guess, I would think it's I guess it was some form of like what my kids like to call flexing.
Flexing. That is a great word. What does that mean? Showing off? What is
yeah, flexing, showing off.
You know what this guy said recently? He said, what's the function of the cave? What's the motive of the cave artist? He goes, to keep people in the cave. That is funny. Like, I don't want you to leave. Just stare at these scribblings. Tell me one major element of your, I usually say creative process, but you can put it in the context you want. You were creative as a computer scientist. You're creative as a builder. Just in general, one major element that's changed and one major element that stayed the same.
That's a tough one, to be honest with you. One that stayed the same for sure is that I tend to approach things very cerebrally and, try to approach them very logically. And although that doesn't sound like a creative process, I think,
that's the right and left hemisphere. We're studying that right now. Right. Your men are more lefty. They're more linear. Women are more right in your logic. There's nothing wrong with that.
No. But it's but so one that's changed is the one I'm having trouble with. So I think probably one thing that's definitely changed is I've become more collaborative in my creativity and my, it's not all it, in my younger days. It was like I knew the best way to do this, and I would create things on my own, and I didn't like working with other people, and I've gotten much better at that.
Lewis Carroll says, I believe as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. Have you believed in any impossible things lately?
No, not really.
That's all right. Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength rather than we're usually taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
Questions are getting harder. A weakness I turned into a strength. Yeah, it's hard for me to think of one I turned into a strength. I can think of weaknesses I've overcome, and overcome meaning compensated for, but nothing. I can't think of something there was a weakness.
What's one you compensated for?
Oh, so what I've compensated for is I'm really quite like very insecure in terms of social situations and like interacting with people to a great extent. And so it's something I've compensated for and learned how to a certain extent, overcome, but not nearly as much as I would have liked to.
But just being able to articulate it, you've turned it into a strength because you recognize. So it is like,
Okay.
if it was like, I have one and I can't articulate it to you, is perception reality?
So it's again something I've thought about before. Is perception reality? I think that I do believe that there is an objective reality outside of myself, outside of my consciousness. But I also believe that perception is my only reality. What I perceive is my reality, but that's not, I guess, maybe what other people might call an objective reality. So. But I do believe in an objective reality outside of human consciousness.
Very good. Walt, anger can be a productive emotion when fill in the blank.
Boy, the only time I think anger can be a productive emotion is if you're somehow being physically threatened and it somehow improves your response. But mostly, I don't think anger is a productive emotion ever.
That's amazing. This is a good example of what happened. I used to say for like 25 years, I'd say, can anger be a productive emotion? And they could simply say yes or no. And then my wife's dad is a social worker, and I worked on some of these questions with him. I says, I'm interested in rewording any of them. And he said, he flipped it, and it's every once in a while I get someone like you who goes, no, anger can't really be a productive emotion. And it's interesting because the way you put it was, yeah, it can be productive if you're, somebody's beating you up or, about to kill you. So I like that. It's sort of fun to know I can go back to the old way too. What's the most significant difference between men and women, physical aside?
So I think, fundamentally, the differences, I think, derive from the physical differences. And the most significant difference is the fact that a female can, can get pregnant and has to live with a baby for 9 months and then presumably has to raise a baby, although that's, not a given. And, a man doesn't have to be any part of that. So I think the difference is that, I think, men are, again, evolutionarily predisposed to not being committed to relationships, and females are evolutionarily predisposed to being committed relationships.
Very good. There's a saying that goes, you create what you resist, or Bob Goldthwait, the comedian, morphed it into you are what you hate. And James Joyce said, it's a curious thing how your mind is super saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve. Louis Buñuel nailed it. He said, thank God I'm an atheist. So how do you respond to this line? I'm not saying I agree or disagree, but what's your feelings on this line? You create what you resist, or one creates what one resists.
Well, I mean, I think so. It's one creates what one resists. I mean, I think that the way we evolve as humans is to challenge ourselves and to resist certain things and to try and encourage or resist the opposite of other things. And so I guess I don't really feel like that's accurate, is that you become what you resist. It's like we have a tendency to become certain things. And the way we become better humans is we resist those things maybe that we've deemed to be less desirable. And so consequently, I think, I don't see that.
No worries. Thank you. How do you find peace of mind?
How do I find peace of mind? I think peace of mind for me comes about with, having a certain level of security, physical, psychological, financial, but also what I do to find peace of mind is I get out in nature. That's my thing. I like being outdoors and just, I live in the country and I like, getting into the woods and clearing my head, and that gives me peace of mind. It's not necessarily the only thing that I like to do that gives me happiness, but it gives me peace of mind.
I agree. That's beautiful. If you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Buy Microsoft stock.
There's a practical.
No, on a more serious note, I would tell myself to take more risks, take more emotional risks.
Wow, it's really specific. I like that. Yeah, I'm really exploring recently. I have this question that goes, what does courage mean to you now? And I'm sort of exploring this word bravery, because I think Joyce was brave in doing Finnegan's Wake because, the way I hear it is Ulysses came off as being so great and he goes, "Oh, I'll show you." And then he sat on the toilet for 17 years and farted out Finnegan's Wake. And it's like, what the fuck is this shit? And I think it took bravery. I mean, I guess the question would be, what does courage mean to you now?
So courage or bravery, I think, are probably pretty close in my mind. But so they're in my opinion, they're innately tied with being afraid. So you can't have courage or bravery without fear. Yeah. And what it means to me is that you want to act a certain way. You want to do something that you're very afraid of, but you make yourself do anyway. To me, that's courage.
Yeah.
You can't have one without the other.
It's really good. Well, we just got a few more minutes, Walt. This has been truly enlightening. I appreciate it. These are 5 questions by Alan Watts. Just briefly off the top of your head, who started it all?
Voltaire.
Nice. That's like the guy told me a couple months ago. He goes, Jimi Hendrix. I goes, that's a great answer. Are we going to make it?
Flip a coin.
Nice. Where do we put it?
I don't know. In its place. I'm not sure.
No, the best part was I don't know, and then in its place. So it's both are important. I like that. Who's cleaning it up?
Our kids.
Nice. And is it serious?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Tell me something good you never had and you never want.
Something good I never had and I never want. To be famous.
It's it. 3 answers I get: fame, money, and heroin. Can you forget to die?
I'd like to think so, but I don't.
On what occasion do you lie?
On what occasion do I lie? So honestly, very rarely, but it depends on what you mean by lie. Because
nice.
An old boss of mine once told me, and he was kind of in the marketing sales arena, said there's the truth and the truth well told. And it really sounded really cool at the time. And I've thought about it over the years, and I realized even the truth well told is a lie.
I'm going to send you my truth flyer. There's a lot of great quotes on truth. If you were in a vat of vomit up to your neck and someone threw a bag of shit at your face, what would you do?
Duck.
Which way should toilet paper come off the roll? Over
the top.
Why over?
Why? Oh, so I have to have a reason now. Because it's easier to grab off the front of the roll.
Well put. The patent has it. 110 years old going over. If a publisher was to release your autobiography off the top of your head, what would the title be?
Stumbling through life.
They want to scent the glue in the binding. What smell would it be?
They want to scent the glue in the binding. Dill.
Dill. What a great, I never got dill. Okay, only a couple more here. Joseph Beuys, he's an artist who actually wrote an extra chapter to Finnegan's Wake. One of his mantras was make the secrets productive. Lou Welsh said, guard the secrets and constantly reveal them. But it was another Joycean, Thornton Wilder, in 1928. He said, art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. Walt, you laid your cards on the table for 90 minutes. I'm grateful. Truly been enlightening. I'm not insinuating you haven't answered this, but what's it really all about for you?
Just making it through this life alive.
That's like Louis Buñuel says, long live the living. I like it. So in closing, there's two more. What's the healthiest cultural shift you see developing today?
The healthiest cultural shift. I mean, I would have to say the acceptance of, different lifestyles.
Yeah. And in closing, Walt, what gives you the most optimism?
I guess just the tremendous creativity of the human mind and the things it's resulted in, mostly good, some bad, over the last century. And I think that as long as we don't totally F it up, I think we'll be able to figure it out. But I think that's what needs to happen, is figuring it out.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It's really been fun. And I look forward to spending more time reading Finnegan's Wake out loud with you. We really got an amazing group, and it's so
yes,
fun.
We do. It is. And thank you. I love listening to you at the group.
Well, I love listening to you, everybody. Okay, over and out. Thanks again, Walt.
Take care.